What I love most about this conversation is the story of a young man whose foundation in life was impacted by an absent father, followed by several stepdads who caused more harm than healing. Brennan and his wife started out basically on a minus scale, and instead of repeating the patterns they inherited, they made a conscious choice to create a different life. They're doing the inner work. They're asking the hard questions and they're choosing to parent with intention, building a home grounded in faith, emotional honesty, and resilience. This episode is about masculinity, fatherhood, and what it really means to lead from within. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did recording it. Too many boys today feel lost, alone, and misunderstood. Too many parents feel the same. Behind today's troubling statistics is a generation of boys longing to be seen, heard, and valued. And yet the conversation around boys' emotional lives is still far too quiet. This new season of Unlocking the Parenting Code is here to change that. This season you'll hear more real conversations with young men, more expert voices on boys' mental health, more solo episodes where I share truths I've learned firsthand, and more wisdom from parents walking this road right now. It's time to open our eyes, open our hearts, and become the change our boys need. Boys aren't broken. They're waiting for us to truly see them, hear them, and stand with them. So tune in to Unlocking the Parenting Code for real conversations, real hope, and a new path forward for our boys. It's time. They're ready. Are we? Welcome back to Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. I'm your host, Kathy, and today I'm welcoming Brennan Falks. Brennan is the founder of Path to Great, a personal development company that helps people grow with intention across 6 core life zones: health, wealth, faith, family, community, and social emotional wellness. Through powerful tools, coaching, and habit systems, Brennan guides individuals toward clarity, alignment, and lasting transformation. Part of his mission is to make personal responsibility visible and achievable, one disciplined step at a time. Thank you for coming on today, Brennan.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Brennan, if someone were meeting you for the first time and wanted to really understand who you are, not just what you do, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that I put maximum effort into everything that I do, everything that I think is worthwhile doing. And so that comes down to my family, my profession, my connections, whether it's with friends or extended family as opposed to immediate family. And I would want them to know that I really value honesty and transparency.
Very nice. Okay, so let's get into some of the male things that this podcast is all about. So, what do you think that it means to be a man today, and what comes to mind, and where do you think those ideas came from?
Um, I think that what it means to be a man today, and this is probably a little bit different than what majority of people think, but I think that it's a very delicate balance of mainstream masculinity, meaning toughness, strength, grit. But I think that the other side of that coin is emotional intelligence, being able to regulate yourself and being able to be vulnerable and speak and again be transparent. So whenever I think of masculinity in a modern sense and how most people understand it, typically it's only that one side of, you know, ego, macho-ness, trying to put up some kind of front to appear a certain way to whoever is watching you because your ego can't let you be humble and vulnerable. And I think that if we don't balance those two things, and I think that we completely miss manhood.
And where do you think that your ideas came from? Like, how did those, why is that the forefront for you?
Well, it wasn't always that way. So I grew up very standard. Yeah, I grew up like just about everybody else in America, which believes that boys don't cry and you got to be tough and suck it up and get over it type of mentality. All of that shifted whenever I started studying and raising my own children and reading a lot of information, a lot of books, diving deeper into childhood development and emotional intelligence and my own personal development and things like that. That completely shifted to where I realized that without being sensitive when it's necessary, you end up being very stonewalled, right? You can't connect with people, especially children or your spouse, for example, my wife. You can't connect with them if you're constantly just this very hard protective layer of a person because it was deeply ingrained in you. And so a lot of the first part of being tough and being strong and all those things, which I really do take pride in, you know, building my mental toughness, my physical toughness, my strength. I'm very active, all those things. I take a lot of pride in that. That all came from my upbringing, and then the other half of it came from me realizing the points of failure within that mentality.
There was something that, I keep coming across when I'm either listening to things or I'm reading things about, modern day masculinity or even like the historical view of masculinity. And from several places, I keep getting these three core values, basically, on masculinity and more from a historical perspective. And it's three P's. You might have heard it yourself, but it's like the three P's. And to be a man, one of the core values is that you are a protector. Another is that you are a provider. And another is that you procreate. And those three core, those are the three core reasons for there to be men. And that's their role, to be the provider, the protector, and the procreator. What do you think about that statement?
I think that that looks at specifically the biological male in society. And I totally agree. I think that all three of those roles are necessary for a man. I wouldn't say that that completely summarizes a man, but from a biological standpoint, I absolutely agree. I mean, I'm a firm believer in different roles. And for lack of a better way to explain it, I personally don't consider men and women equal. Not in the sense of like we don't get equal rights or anything like that, but in the sense of I have completely different jobs than what my wife has. And that's a good thing. That's how society functions well. And it's not to say that I can't nurture my children, for example, but in the same way that she's not going to protect against a real threat or be the first one to protect against a real threat, it's not my natural instinct to nurture. And so, yes, I completely agree. And I see where that comes from as far as providing, protecting, and procreating. Procreating, of course, takes two, but that those two elements specifically, providing and protecting, I think that that is it's not exclusively a man's job. Protecting, I would say, mostly is. Providing seems to be taking a different trajectory in the last several years. But
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
actually what I was going to
that's the
kind of,
role.
that's what I was going to kind of, pick your brain a little bit about because those particular aspects of manhood were very clear in previous generations. And in probably from the 70s or 60s, from the women's movement time forward, especially the role, well, all three roles actually, they're not so defined anymore. And the roles can often be flipped. And I wonder, what kind of a connection that has with all the headlines that you see about, the epidemic of young men being so lonely, being, you know, living in the basement, playing their games on, like all of those stereotypical things that now are coming out saying, this is the crisis that's happening with young men. I wonder if that's part of it, like, because it's all connected with identity. And whereas before it was, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it was clear what the roles were.
Right.
And
Right.
today it's not.
Yeah, I think so. My perspective on male and female and household operation and things like that is predominantly a biblical standpoint. But I think with what you're saying, as far as the young male who's in the basement playing video games and things like that, I think a big portion of it is that I don't know about in other cultures and countries, but all of American society for a very long time was teaching men that they were toxic, essentially. I think that we're coming out of that. I think that there's a new wave of refreshing masculinity. But for a very long time, I think a lot of men were maybe a little bit hesitant to express their manhood because of how toxic it's viewed. But that's why I really am a strong proponent of that balance because um, back to what I said about my views being biblical, one of my prime examples of a man is King David from the Bible. On one hand, he slays giants. On the other hand, he's incredibly vulnerable and emotional, pouring out his heart at certain times, not afraid to ask for help, those types of things. He's humble. And so if I can look at a very balanced picture of the two things, and if I can train myself and form myself to do both, then I think that I'm embodying what a man is.
What do you think are some of the pressures that you or young men in general um, feel that people might not be talking about yet,
Some of the pressures of expressing
being a young
manhood,
man? Yeah.
being a young man, that people aren't talking about yet. I think that I don't know that there's enough noise out there about the difficulties that men face. And I think that it comes with the culture where, men are not allowed to complain. They had their time and now things are changing and they have to be this very particular way because all of society says so. And I think that both sexes equally have their own shared difficulties. But I think that there's a lot of difficulties placed on men that don't get talked about because it's back to that same mentality of suck it up and get over it. Men don't cry. And so when I consider the weight of providing, the weight of protecting, and not so much the weight of procreating, I don't think that there's any from a very naturalistic standpoint, I don't think there's any problem there. But as far as providing and protecting, if you're not really putting maximum effort into those two things, it's hard for you to fit that role. It's already incredibly challenging. And if you're not actively working toward doing those things better, then I think that that's going to create a lot of pressure on you as a man, especially once you start to have your own family.
It's interesting, because a lot of things you really don't know what you don't know until you can experience. And some things you just can't experience, everything from the other side. But I know in um, in my own personal world, my husband and I had started out originally, we both worked outside of the home. And then as we made decisions based on what was the best thing for our family, there was a period of time where we switched roles. Well, we didn't switch roles, we created new roles, really. And I became the breadwinner, and he was the person who took care of like everything else. Like all I had to do was go to work, basically, and be present for the family. And that was my first real glimpse at that pressure that you're talking about and the burden, or burden's not really the right word, but it was not knowing what that felt like. That it wasn't just, I get to walk out the door and he's taking care of the kids or whatever situation is happening. It was that if something happens to me, there's not going to be bread on the table. If,
Right.
if I screw up at work, it's not just going to affect me. I have people who are counting on me being able to be the provider. And I had never had that experience before because, we did it together basically. So I think today there are more people who are doing, like, a part of me thinks, especially with children, like, wouldn't it be, and like, you can tell me if this goes totally against what you think, but wouldn't it be just really eye-opening to be able to be raising a family in a way that for certain periods of time, like, for example, um, the first year, the mother stays home with the child, the father is the provider. And the second year, they switch because the woman doesn't want to be out of the work field for as long as, and they keep switching back and forth. And so that they really, like, deeply understand and can be compassionate about the challenges and the gifts that each one of those roles gives to the person as they're playing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually think that that would be I think that would be very insightful. I think that would provide a lot of perspective, much like what you experienced. And my wife and I actually have a similar story where for about 6 months to a year, when I went from a job to full time starting my business, she was the sole breadwinner, and we dealt with a lot of those same stressors. And I think that that perspective would be invaluable. However, I think that it would take a very special type of people to volunteer for that experiment because it does take a toll. And when I mentioned how different and how unequal, for lack of a better word, that I think men and women are, there's various factors that play into that. Just on a hormonal level, for example, men have a very high level of testosterone. Women do not. And so whenever I'm with my children solo, I'm fine. I can manage it for a good amount of time. When I'm with my children, if I were to be with my children day after day after day after day, my patience would wear thin, probably significantly faster than my wife's. And it's not to say that she doesn't run out of patience. She certainly does. I think that's just a natural human behavior. However, I think that we're just made to do things differently. I'm as a man with the hormone testosterone flowing, I'm okay standing up and being brave when there's a real threat. I still may feel some bit of timidness, but I'm going to stand and be in that role a lot more naturally than my wife can be. Now, if my wife is out alone with the children, of course she's going to do that. And she does have a level of testosterone. Every woman does, especially depending on different parts of their cycle. And so, though, just that very basic one thing relating to the physical attributes of men and women, that changes the dynamic. And when you try to switch roles, I think you see a lot of problems that we're seeing in society right now.
There's some things I really agree with what you just said, and part of the issues that I believe the root of them comes from us, and I don't know if it's men as well as women, but definitely women who really don't understand the role of testosterone. And even when I've tried to, like, I've picked up maybe one or two books, but there's not a great deal of research and information out there on how testosterone affects everything about you, your physical, your mental, your hormonal, everything. And without understanding that, I think it's very difficult to really understand each other. Um, and as far as we're not equal, I love that because you know, I can remember working in the 80s and being in a very, what we called at the time, a very progressive daycare center. And one of the reasons we were considered progressive, because that was, just, a decade or two after the women's movement, was that we didn't provide an environment for any kind of stereotyping. So, we encouraged, the little boys to go in the dolly corner, and we made sure we had the,
Yeah,
hammers and that for little girls. And the thinking at the time was it's neutral. It's neutral. And at the time we thought that was, we were very forefront thinkers.
yeah,
And when I look, with kind of the grace of years and wisdom and cycles that we've all gone through, it's kind of like we don't have the real appreciation. We are different. And to be able to be respectful of those differences and the challenges and the gifts that both have. It doesn't mean that we need to be pigeonholed into any one situation. But without understanding those core differences and respecting them, like you talk about, the concept of the toxic male. Well, that's what, to me, that's part of that. When we can respect what those differences are and how they show up in our life and work together with them, then I think that's when you have the kind of society that we want our children to have.
right. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think what happens is a lot of women, maybe some men too, I don't know, but as far as the feminist movement goes, a lot of women would take that very personally and say, what do we mean? What do you mean we're not equal? We can do anything that you can do. And it's not coming from, I'm not being condescending when I say that. I'm not saying that you're less valuable as a human being. I'm saying that we are different, and that's
Yeah.
okay. We're supposed to be. If we weren't different, we couldn't procreate. And if we didn't have these two different dynamics, we wouldn't be able to raise children and create the society that we all want to see. I come from a household with a missing father and some really broken stepfathers, and that takes a serious toll on children. So if you don't have a man who's fulfilling the true role of a man, and if you don't have a woman who's fulfilling the true role of a woman, and they're not both taking part in raising a child, you're going to have certain elements missing. If you have both people competing with each other and trying to do all the same things that each other do, or whatever, one of the sexes is competing with the other and thinking they can do everything just as good or equal to as the other, it's just simply not effective. And there's a lot of women out there who are doing a lot of things that men do, and some of them are crushing it. Some of them are running companies and all those different things, but it doesn't come without a cost. And it doesn't come without a cost for your hormones, your stress levels, the way that you manage that, the dynamics of your family, and the way that your children grow up. Another simple detail is just children having skin to skin contact and being able to be breastfed by their mothers if everything is available for them to breastfeed. Just that alone puts that child leaps and bounds ahead in the developmental process from a child who doesn't get that very close, intimate bond and dynamic with the mother. And so if you're one of these moms who's immediately wanting to go back to the workforce, whether it's coming from a place of pride or not, but you're not taking that time to dive deeply into your motherly nature, it comes with a cost. And I'm not here to say anybody's wrong or right or to tell anyone to live how I live, but if people come to me asking, of course I'm going to tell them what I would do if I were in their shoes.
Unfortunately, the again, I think it's the way society, and because different cultures have different ways to accomplish some of those positive aspects. But often families, in order to survive and have the quality of life they want for their family, um, feel that it's necessary to have two incomes. Like until we left one country and moved to another, it was not it was not an option. It wasn't on the table. The minute it was on the table, then we made a choice whether we both worked or one worked. But lots of people don't have the choice. And it was kind of the same thing when you said something about hmm, it was something connected with uh, breastfeeding your children and role modeling. That's where I wanted to get back to role modelings. Ideally, we would love to have, every family that's raising children to be two people that complement each other and, intentionally parent. But too many situations, that's not the case. And I also think culture plays a role in that one. But I've also seen children be able to like thrive, even if they're not in that ideal situation, as long as they have very solid, good role models of both genders. And
Absolutely.
so, it's okay. So you kind of touched upon your growing up father-wise, because I was going to ask you if you had a father figure that, helped you to, how to express emotions, and then how that type of father figure was shaping the way you're parenting today. Do you want to talk about that? It sounds like you might have an interesting answer to that one.
Yeah, no, that was not all my experience. I had I had all of my school break visits with my dad, majority of my school break visits. So I did not see him very often at all. I still, to this day, I don't really have much of a relationship with him. There's absolutely no transparency, and I don't know that we've ever had more than maybe like two actual meaningful conversations.
How old
And
were you when he left?
my parents divorced when I was 2.
Okay.
And yeah, and then we moved to a different state. I moved with my mom to a different state when I was 7. And
Okay.
so from that time on, it was just, I just hardly ever saw my dad. I spent summers with him, which was the time that I was able to finally connect with him a bit. But when there's so much more undoing than there is doing, I don't really think any progress is ever made. And my current relationship with him is indicative of that. On the other side of the coin, I was raised by a very rough stepfather, a man who was just really, really rough around the edges. And that there was a lot of things that took place, a lot of shouting, a lot of violence, a lot of um, emotional unintelligence, if anything, just constantly angry at the drop of a hat for the craziest little things. And so what, what I did through experiencing that was I convinced myself that basically I just wasn't going to feel any emotions ever at all. And that worked for a long time. That was effective for a long time until I had children and I was unable to suppress those emotions. And then I would notice myself getting out of control, whether I was starting to get really frustrated and needed to separate myself from the situation, or whether I was unwilling to be vulnerable with my wife, or whatever it was. I realized that all of this suppressing is also not the way. And so there has to be something else in the middle that is actually effective. And what's effective is learning what emotions are for and being able to regulate them and express them without harming others and all those different things. But yeah, that was not at all my experience where I had any. My wife and I have landed on all of this on our own. On our own, we haven't had any guidance. We haven't had any push or anything in that direction. It's just all been a very deep, meaningful search for. There's got to be something better. Let's just be humble and admit that we're wrong in XYZ, and there has to be somebody who knows how to help us navigate this.
Well, I do think whenever you do anything intentionally, and with curiosity, you grow, and that's got to be a good thing. So, keeping in thinking about when you first became a father. So, what were some of the big changes internally, like emotionally, mentally, spiritually? Like what big changes happened when you've got two children, is that right?
I have two children. Yes, I have a boy and a girl. The boy was first.
Okay, so when your son was born, what changed for you in your inside, in your core?
A lot of things changed whenever I believed that I was a certain way, and all of that got exposed. And so a big part of my growth has been realizing that and this is across multiple life zones and in all different experiences, realizing that I don't necessarily live the way that I say I live or the way that I think I live. And whenever that gets exposed in you, that is a very uncomfortable situation. And then at that point, you have a choice. You have a choice to either continue on putting up that front and pretending, or you have a choice to confront it and change it. And so that was one of the things that was exposed whenever I had my son was here I am thinking that I have complete control over my emotions, but then I'm realizing if something outside of me can dictate what I'm feeling, my child, my son, and his behavior, his very natural behavior, if that can dictate what I'm feeling, maybe I don't have such a good grasp on my feelings. I'm giving my power and my control to my child or whatever other circumstance at hand. And then I'm just lying to myself and pretending that I can manage it when in reality I can't. And I know that as a father and as a role model, as you said, I don't want to, I don't want my children to experience that or quite frankly, anything, almost anything that I experienced. I don't want them to experience being able to see through somebody and noticing that somebody is fraudulent and not authentic. And everybody knows, people know, you know, I know, children definitely know whenever something's coming across as inauthentic. And so I faced that very difficult challenge, and my wife and I together, we both said we have to change this. We have to either be about it or we're just going to repeat the exact same cycle that has been repeated so many times before us, and we just flat refuse to do that.
It's a lot of work, isn't it?
Oh my goodness, I don't know that I can express it very clearly or very well. I don't think I can articulate it. I really do think that somebody has to be following their own journey to truly understand the amount of work that goes into it. I mean, I don't know how everybody else manages, but my wife and I, we don't have a TV. We don't spend time on all these various extracurricular mind-numbing things. Like we're reading books, we're studying, we're trying to be as creative as we can. We're connecting with our children. We're doing things like this, and it really is a significant amount of work.
I think it really comes down to how reflective you are, because if you're not reflective, then you don't catch yourself. Like my childhood, I think was a very healthy, like I've got, warm and fuzzy, memories mostly. Um, and when I was thinking about how I wanted to raise my child, there were so many things that I thought, oh, I'm going to do this. Dad did this. This is what I liked that. I think it was powerful as far as just humanity goes. And I remember that there was one thing in particular that I thought, okay, he did that to me. Like, and it was his way of dealing with things is that he would just close down. If he had an argument with you, that was the end of the conversation, and that the conversation might not start again for a long, long time.
Yeah,
And we had challenges with that. And those are not, so that was one thing. It was like, okay, that's the thing. I'm going to make sure, and that was more with my partner actually than with my son, but still, it will keep all of a sudden, I think we're doing really well. And like we've been together probably longer than you have been alive. And still, I'll be sitting by myself or walking by myself, and I'll be thinking about something that's kind of, jangled me a little bit, and then I'll catch myself and smack myself on the side of the head. It's like, you're doing it.
Yes.
Even though I am so intentional, I practice it, I'm successful a lot of the time. I'll
Yes.
still, it's like, holy smokes, this is just so much work to try to change something that has been part of your, it's part of you, but you don't want it to be part of who you are now.
Yes. Yeah, I've got a good friend on a similar path to me, and one of the things that he has said is there's no perfect, which means that there's no end. So since perfect is not achievable, the journey just doesn't end. And I couldn't agree more. This is a constant journey.
Yeah.
And back to what I said earlier, it really does come down, at least in one sense, it's very important to put maximum effort into what you're doing. There's a scripture right here that I have taped in front of my desk. It says, "Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might." And it's from the book of Ecclesiastes. And I remember reading that as a young child, and I have applied that to a lot of things that I do. And there's times, just like you said, when I realize that I'm either doing the wrong thing or I'm not doing the right thing. I'm doing the thing that I've been trying to break or whatever it is. But if I can refresh on that and remind myself and just practice humility, I can say, you know what? I don't really think I've been trying as hard as I can. I'll take personal inventory often and
Yeah.
be brutally honest with myself. And I think that that's required. Like you said, if you can't be introspective and pay attention to what's going on with you, I don't know that you can survive this journey.
Okay, so I know my life changed completely because of having a son. Like everything from like it's changed everything in my world. How has fatherhood challenged or changed or transformed your own understanding about masculinity?
Well, a lot of what we've talked about so far, so you brought up something earlier as far as your what you guys were doing in your school. I was raised that, certain things are girl things and boys don't cry and you got to be tough and just all of the regular things. And I've noticed a very natural curiosity in both of my children in things that are deemed either male or female by society, but just like you said, are completely normal and neutral. And so whenever my son recently has taken a huge fascination in the color pink, and I've since having him and since starting this journey of just undoing everything, I've I've come to a very simple understanding that pink is a very natural color. There's
Oh,
Just because a society says something about the
yeah.
color pink means nothing. Just because the girls are the ones who wear all the pink means absolutely nothing. If we were to look at nature, birds are pink, flowers are pink, um, various parts of other animals are pink. I mean, like, it's so silly to group things like that and then just absolutely ban it from a certain sex. I don't think that that's very effective. However, when again, you have to balance that when it comes to roles. I do think that specific gender roles are necessary. I don't know that I could convince anybody of my position, and that's not really what I'm here to do. But, you know, having to face those challenges and navigate those things has definitely caused a lot of the change that you're getting at. There's just been a lot of things that I've had to sit back and re-examine and be humble with.
I think sometimes it's harder to raise the child that is the same gender as you are. I think when you're raising the other gender, you have a little bit more curiosity. You're not putting the assumptions that you really know a little bit more because you're of the same gender. So you're in the position of having one of each. How old are your children? I forget.
My son is 8 and my daughter is 5.
8 and 5. Okay. So when you look at the two of them, okay, so when you look at your little boy, how old was he when is it just recently that he's gotten into pink?
Um, yeah, I would say within like the last 4 months, his color was red, and my daughter's color was pink, and now his color is pink, and my daughter's color is blue and red, and so I there's something going on where they're just kind of reversing roles, but yes, recently.
So a lot of parents struggle with wanting to be open-minded and flexible and, really tuning into what your child is trying to show you, trying to teach you and encouraging that kind of an environment. And then they're trying to, I'm speaking especially of boys, then they try to balance it with, okay, that can happen at home because we can have that kind of open, vulnerable environment. But when he goes into the real world, if he walks into school in grade 2 and he wears a pink skirt, somebody might let him know in not so nice ways that society is wanting to send him a message. So parents might start to pull the reins in order that thing of trying to protect them. So it becomes a real
Yeah.
catch-22 for a lot of people. How do you kind of handle that in your family? When I was raising my son, I longed for a guide, something real, honest, and grounded in what boys truly need. So I created the book that I wish I'd had. Packed with tools and real world strategies that actually work, you'll learn how to nurture his emotional world and finally understand the feelings behind his behavior. Because boys don't need punishment, they need guidance. We'll bust the myths that keep boys boxed in and help you support him through the real challenges of growing up. Most of all, it's about transforming your connection, one small moment at a time. Raising boys who become remarkable men. Get your copy today, and let's create a beautiful future together.
Yeah, so I agree. I think that a lot of the ways that parents navigate these types of situations is from a position of fear. And I don't think that that's conducive to figuring out how to actually handle it. I will say, however, my wife is a stay-at-home mom and we homeschool our children. And so a philosophy that I hold is we want them to be able to express themselves and fail a lot at this age when the price tag to their failures is not so costly. However, we do want to prepare them for society and the way that it handles all of these situations. And so the types of things that we'll teach our children to navigate this will be things like you can do things um, in a particular way that society may not agree with, but you need to do them with purpose. You need to do them with confidence. You don't just need to do them because you're seeking a certain type of attention or anything like that. We do teach them, again, back to the biblical perspective, we don't allow them to dress in clothing of the opposite sex, for example. We do hold some boundaries there, but we're also lenient in some ways in regard to a favorite color. What is the harm in my child loving the color pink? I think it's a beautiful color too. What's wrong with that? If I navigate that from a position of fear and I start to teach him that pink is just for girls and he can't like pink because it's girly and he's going to get teased and blah blah blah, he's probably going to like pink more so in spite of everything that I just told him, to the point that he's wanting to wear it from a position of flamboyance or attention or testing all of the waters that I just told him is absolutely going to happen because I'm so scared that my child might be perceived as a girl even though he's a boy. But I I think that if we navigate that with them while we are the main influences in their lives, while we are their peers and they don't have peer influence from society and other children who are raised in completely different households with different values and all those things. I think that we can help him experience whatever it is that he's experiencing when he's fascinated with this color. And I don't think that we're going to have such a negative effect of, you know, a lot of what society is going through right now as far as not understanding their own sex and their own gender.
I think sometimes one of the biggest challenges that we have as parents is when we have strong feelings, convictions, values, or whatever, and our children get to a stage or a point in time where they make a choice, an independent choice that isn't the choice we would like for them to have. And I often, wonder how, like, how do you, I don't know that you prepare for that. So I'll give you an example. My parents, we were raised strong Catholics, and there were six of us, and it was the expectation without fail. And when we were young, it was something that we loved to do. But we went to church every Sunday. We prayed together. We had grace before meals. You said your nighttime prayers, and I mean that was our world. We were in a very religious world. And I remember when I was a young teenager, just getting really curious. We were from such a small town, like less than 1,000 people, but there were five different churches. And my friends, some are here, some are there, and I wanted to explore. I wanted to see what was their church like. And I think it was very, very hard for my parents for me to be doing that. But I think they also recognized if they forced me not to, rein that in and just follow their path, that perhaps the moment I wasn't under their roof, it would be a little bit worse. So they gave me that freedom. And actually, for the little bit of time, I explored I was very interested in spirituality and religions.
Right.
And, and then came back to it, maybe 4 or 5 years later. So have you ever thought about that? Like, what would happen
Oh,
if, later on that kind of thing happens?
yes. I actually think about that often. I obsess over this entire conversation. And so I said at the beginning of the conversation, something that I would want somebody to know about me as a person is that I deeply value honesty. And it wasn't always that way. I was not honest for a very long time with people around me and with myself. All of that changed whenever I really started doing the work that you've mentioned. And so now the way that we navigate these situations with our children is I am very open and honest with my children, and my goal is to match that with their maturation. And so whenever they ask me any difficult questions, I'll either tell them the brutal truth, or I'll tell them I don't want to discuss that with you until you're a little bit older and more mature. And so when it comes to things like what you had said earlier, navigating my son's fascination with pink, part of the honest discussion that we've had with him is the way that society works today and the types of stigmas and viewpoints and perspectives that other people hold, and letting him know that those are the types of things that he would face in the world if he were to start wearing pink, for example. And we haven't had a lot of deep conversations with him in regard to the color because it's a very new phase. But a lot of other things, I'm not afraid to tell my children when I don't know the answer to something. And so our faith more closely aligns to the Jewish faith. Um, we're not Jewish. We don't practice Judaism, but our faith is very closely related. And I'm also at the same time, I'm completely open and I try to really remove as much bias as I can whenever I'm looking into any culture, perspective, topic, whatever. Um, and so I teach my children in the same way. And I believe that if we can help them, if we can expose them to things, again, when the price tag of their failures and their decisions is small, if we can guide them through that process instead of just telling them, no, 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 you don't do this, we do this, this is how our family works. If I can guide them through that process, And if I can be honest with them and give them all of the information that I know, assuming that they're mature enough to handle it, then that's what I'm going to do. And so there's various questions that my children have asked me just the other day. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was my daughter. She was asking me like, well, where does God come from? Like, who made God? How is there a God? How is God a thing?
What
And
a
at the end of it
beautiful
all,
question.
right, right. And instead of me being like, well, it just is, don't ask that type of question, or really like stamping on her curiosity, instead, I'm totally comfortable saying, well, I'm not really sure. It's what I believe. It's what mommy believes. We believe it because we've studied the scriptures and that's what the scriptures teach. But I don't have all of the answers to those big types of questions. I don't know. I know what the scriptures teach, and that's what I believe, but I don't believe it because I have hard evidence. I believe it because I have faith. And so when I can have a discussion like that with my child and they can take away from it that there is an opportunity to have other viewpoints and other perspectives, I think that at the end of that all, and what I hope from this big experiment that we call life, is that they'll fall back on the reliability that we have provided. If I can be a reliable source of brutal honesty and truth whenever it's permitted, and everything else I can be completely objective about, then I think that they'll have the same type of perspective and philosophy as I want them to.
There's one consistent priority thing that I always talk to parents about, and I stress that, I'm not just speaking anymore just from the books I've read or the, courses I've taken or, my educational experience. None of that. I can honestly say if there is one thing for parents to focus on, it's communication. Because if you have that deep, rich, open, honest communication with your children right from the get-go,
Mm-hmm.
you will stay connected and have, the best relationship. You will also get conversations that you don't want to hear, but you will be grateful that they feel comfortable enough to come to you,
Yes.
that they still know that door is open. So, yeah, communication is really kind of everything. I
Yeah.
have just, sorry, did you want to
Well,
respond?
I have just one thing to say about that. So, are you familiar with Gabor Mate?
Oh, I love him. Love
Okay,
him.
yeah. So I've read several of his books, but one of the big things for your audience and anyone who doesn't know, one of the big things that he talks about is peer influence. And one of the main reasons that we've chosen to homeschool our children, as difficult as it has been at times, and again, talk about the pressures, that's one of the reasons why I mentioned I would hope that it could be talked about more for men to understand the pressure behind providing and being a sole provider. But anyways, one of the main reasons that we've chosen to homeschool is because peer influence is it's an incredible thing. It's a force of nature. And if you're allowing your children to be influenced by their peers significantly more than they're influenced by you, especially in these earlier ages, you're going to get a whole host of problems that come on the backside of that. And so just me as an example, the way I was raised, no, I'm not knocking my mom. She did the best with what she was given and how she thought, and the education that she had and all those things. But one of the main things that she would say was, whenever we would leave the house, no sex, no drugs, no alcohol, and that was like it. That was all that we ever got. Of course, me knowing now and going through my own personal development, of course, young teenagers are going to have curiosity about all of those things. And if you're just telling them no, you don't do it, they're going to seek answers to their curiosity elsewhere, which is exactly what I did. And so when I was, I think, 12 or 13, I got basically all of the information that I had ever received up to that point about sex from a peer who had a very difficult upbringing and a very difficult life and was a very poor influence on me. And so when you don't cultivate that connection with your children and that communication, as you said, and building that deep, intimate relationship with your children, you really truly are setting them up for failure because they are going to seek it from somewhere. And if you're not a trustworthy source, and if you punish or, you don't control your emotions or you're inauthentic or any of those things, if those are the hats that you wear, your children are going to find all of the information that they need from you. They're going to find it from somebody else.
Yeah. I think it's even a bit more frightening today than when you
Oh,
were
yeah.
growing up because of the online world. I know for us, like parents, sometimes there can be some conversations that you're not comfortable having, or you think
Yeah.
I'm not really equipped, but your child is very interested, and I'm a strong, strong advocate for, high quality books, high quality materials at
Yes.
that level. So if they're 8 years old and they're, all of a sudden they're just talking, they're really curious about bodies, then you get them the best books for an 8-year-old to read about bodies, because what happens
Absolutely.
is that then they will have questions that they can talk to you about,
Yes.
that they didn't know they had those questions till they had some
Right.
good solid information to go with. So you can get around the tough questions and tough conversations a little bit by getting that good information, even if it's not coming directly from you first. You can
Right.
go around it a little bit. But yeah, that's not easy at all.
It's not. It's not. And it's also not easy to be, um, it's also not easy to remove your bias in those conversations,
Yeah.
but it is crucial. You must remove your bias whenever you're investigating or when you're bringing up your children and teaching them something. You have to remove your bias because we don't understand, I think, in large, we don't understand how much we impose our bias.
Hmm.
And whenever you're telling someone how to think and they're a young child, they trust you and they do that. They listen to you and they let you think for them, or they think in the way that you're telling them to think. But then they get to be an adult and eventually they come to realize, I don't know if I've ever formed a thought of my own. And then they may not disagree with you and the way that you've taught them to think, but because that autonomy was so hijacked, it's almost guaranteed that they're going to go polar opposite to what you taught them in spite of you dictating what they have thought for so long.
Yeah. I think too, like when you have that kind of a relationship where it really is kind of open door to, whatever tough conversations they want to have, they know that they can come to you. And like you said,
Yeah,
sometimes it is really challenging to kind of make sure the responses you are giving are not going to, have the wrong effect. So as a rule of thumb, I find, if as a parent, the first thing we think of is whatever I'm going to say right now, whatever, I'm going to impart on them, is it going to bring us closer, or is it going to put a distance between us? And that is a really good rule of thumb to try to gauge, okay, yep, that's what I think, that's what I want to say right now, but what's going to happen? Are they going to rebel? Are they going to shut down? Are they going to stop coming to me? And if you put the relationship first, it doesn't mean that you're condoning what they're saying, but it's
right.
keeping the relationship at the forefront of what's going on. And that's really
Yeah,
important, I think.
yes, I agree.
Well, Brennan, is there, before we finish off today, is there anything that we didn't talk, like I have a whole bunch of other questions that I never got to, but is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had of?
Uh, it's a deep question, requires a little bit of thought. I came into this discussion knowing that it would be really good after speaking with you briefly before, and I don't necessarily think that there's anything we didn't cover. I would just really continue to beat the same drum of being honest with your children. The thing that keeps coming to my mind, even based on what you just said, is being honest. If if you're not honest with your children, and I'm talking about everything, everything, and I think that whenever I explain that to people, they think that that means that I just tell my children everything all the time. That's not what it means.
Mm.
I actually was shocked, probably about 3 years ago when we were starting to be asked difficult questions by my son who was turning 5. I was shocked with the way that he responded when I told him, I don't want to tell you about that right now, but I promise you I will tell you everything I know about it when you're older. And he took it in stride and was just like, okay, moving on. And to this day, certain topics like that have not come back up from him yet.
Yeah.
But when they do, because I'm cultivating this relationship of honesty and transparency, I know he's going to come to me. And I want him to come to me. And I know that from my own experience and from the experience of all my peers, none of us went to our parents for anything that really mattered. Whether it was because we were afraid of, being spanked or afraid of the emotional response that we may get, or because we were just told that it was such a no-no and it was so taboo. Um, we didn't go to our parents for anything, and that's a majority of my peers that I grew up with. Um, as an example, just real quick, a little story. My both of my children are aware of what a period is because my wife and I have been open about, a very natural female, blanking on the word, a very natural female process. Um, she has done a lot of study into her cycle and hormones and fertility and just all of these, various things of really deep diving into her health. And so we've been transparent on that. And I didn't even know what a period was until high school, probably. And there was a situation one day where my children came into the room. My mom was there. My mom asked a question about what we would be doing or something like that if we were going somewhere. And my son responded, "No, mommy has her period." And my mom's expression was just like appalled that he had said such a thing that was so secretive and
Taboo.
taboo. And I was just like, I just looked at her and kind of smirked, like, what's the big deal? Like, this is a natural human process. It's like, why are we creating situations for our children, A, where we're not honest with them and we just tell them bold-faced lies, like Santa Claus, for example, and then we expect them to be honest, but then B, where we don't tell them about things that they are mature enough to handle, to where later when it comes back up and they're around peers, they're going to seek that information from them. Those types of things just don't, it doesn't make sense to me, and I don't think that you're going to have an effective relationship with your child if you're doing those types of things.
Yeah, I agree. It comes back to the same thing over and over and over again. How
Yeah,
you communicate is going to impact everything you do in parenting.
yeah.
So, Brennan, where can people contact you that would like to contact you?
You can find me, the best place is at my website, which is pathtogreat.co.
Okay, and everything's there. So, do you have social media?
Everything's there. There's social media there, so I'm on social media, YouTube. My contact information is there. All of my services, everything that my wife and I are doing is there.
Okay, I will just plug in for you. I did go and look at a few of your videos, and what I loved a lot was the things that you and your wife did connected with sharing about good books and explaining what was in the book, and I thought that was just beautiful. So good on both of you.
Yes, thank you. We are very big advocates of reading, and
Yeah.
it was not that way for me before, but I have really found a deep love for reading nonfiction books
Hmm.
because they really have contributed so much to who I am becoming and have become.
Yeah. And it will just continue.
Yes, it's great.
Well, thank you, Brennan. I'm really grateful for the time that you spent with me today and your honesty and your wisdom. And I'm sure that it will have an impact on people that are listening. So thank you for joining me.
I hope so. You're welcome. Thank you so much.
And to our listeners, thank you for being with us. Please share this conversation with someone who's raising boys or someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe, leave a review, and come back next week for more real conversations on unlocking the parenting code, all about boys. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. Every conversation we have here is a step toward raising boys who feel seen, heard, and deeply valued. If you're looking for more support on this journey, I invite you to visit me at sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll find a link in the show notes. And as always, thank you for being part of this important movement. Until next time, take good care.